Hey friends, it's Susan from legslikemind.com. I am going to be doing an interview today with a friend, and so I'm going to start out with just an introduction of lipedema, and then I'll introduce my friend who's joining me shortly. So, this is Susan O'Hara from legslikemind.com. If you haven't followed me before, I have a YouTube channel, a website, all kinds of social media presences to help spread awareness of a condition called lipedema. And lipedema affects approximately 11% of women in the world. It's a chronic condition, and the way that it is characterized is it's an abnormal accumulation of fat. Kind of in the lower half of the body, typically. A lot of times it can affect the hips, the thighs, the legs. In some people like me, it also affects the arms. It exclusively, almost exclusively affects women, and it's like a disproportionate distribution of body fat, creating this pear-like appearance. If you've seen people who are little bitty on the top and big on the bottom, that might be somebody who has lipedema. So lipedema is called the painful fat disease. It can cause pain and tenderness and swelling in the areas that are affected. A lot of times women complain about their legs hurting whenever their cat just walks on them or sits on their lap, right? The fat that is abnormal and diseased, it's resistant to traditional weight loss. So a lot of us have had bariatric surgeries, we've been on all the drugs, and it's really hard to lose that body weight in that diseased lipedema type area. As you can imagine, emotionally, it can be really taxing to live with lipedema. It can impact a lady's body image, self esteem, and our mental well being, as we might get judged. We get judged all the time for being overweight. We get sort of targeted, and there's the stereotypes of people who are larger. They're lazy, they're not trying, they're non-compliant, all that stuff, right? So all kinds of societal judgment. And then our appearance changes as the disease progresses. So that can be really hard on people emotionally. It's really an important part, and sadly, I think it's really not dealt with enough, but it's one of the most important parts of dealing with lipedema and managing it for ladies who have it. So it also can have a lot of implications for other parts of our lifestyle. So, for example, whenever our disease progresses, a lot of us become immobile, and we have problems with our gait and our knees specifically, and our feet, because of our bodies just being so out of proportion for so long. And what that can cause is, this loss in mobility and even retirement from work way earlier than what we were planning on. Unfortunately, some ladies who progress to the full stage 4 and beyond end up staying in bed and don't get out of the house anymore, and that kind of thing. So lipedema can really affect people in a lot of ways. So to recap, lipedema is a real disease. There's no cure for it. There is a genetic component to it that hasn't yet been completely identified, but it's painful. It can cause decreases in mobility, limits to the range of motion. It causes a lot of fatigue, so that also can impact our ability to work in full-time jobs. We don't really know why it affects the energy levels that way, but it does, and fatigue is definitely one of the top symptoms. And then the other thing is this psychosocial impact that's really been neglected as researchers are trying to figure out just like what causes the disease and that sort of stuff. There are not a lot of people that are focusing on the psychological impact about body image, self esteem, the loss of mobility, the changes in financial status. And then the last thing that's an interesting concept with lipedema is because there's no treatment other than surgery, which a lot of ladies, for one reason or another, like not being able to get insurance, they may be too heavy for the weight of the table that the doctor can use in surgery, or maybe they just are afraid of surgery, or they've had such terrible experiences in the medical field with being fat shamed their whole lives that they're not willing to go through the potential embarrassment of surgery and stuff like that too. So the burden of lipedema really falls on the woman to do self-care. So there's so much stuff that a woman can do and try to avoid progression and even improve her symptoms. They wear compression. They use these pneumatic compression pumps. For me, I swim 200 minutes a week at least. drink lots of water, dry brushing, using vibration plates. A lot of people will use red light therapy. There's so much stuff, skincare, right? So while there's no cure for lipedema, if you whether you have surgery or not, you still have to do this extensive self-care to try and keep it under control. And that's a burden. To have this disease is expensive and it's a burden time-wise. What's even more psychologically taxing is we don't really know that all the things we're doing really make a difference in how much we progress. So you're doing everything you can and you're just hoping, but you know that that affects our mental health. So, obviously, having lipedema can be super overwhelming and it can be the source of grief. So, today I'm going to be interviewing my friend Danny Grimes, who I've known since 1991. And he is a clinically certified chaplain with over 40 years of experience.
Okay.
Great, looks good.
All
So
right.
today I'm here with Dr. Daniel Grimes, who is a clinically certified chaplain with over 40 years of experience. He's the founder and CEO of the Grief Recovery Center, and he's also one of the grief support coaches and a life coach there. He uses a method called the grief recovery method, which is evidence-based and action-oriented way of dealing with clients that helps them focus through the pain of loss. So Danny, thanks for joining me, and forgive me for calling you Danny. We've just known
Oh
each other
no.
for so long. So
No,
um,
people that love me call me Danny.
right.
Right.
So that works out just fine.
Yeah.
So I have some questions that I prepared for you, and we can follow through them. And if you have anything to add at any point in time, just jump in there. So
Sure. Okay.
before I brought you in on the interview, I was explaining to my viewers a little bit about lipedema and how it causes different aspects of life change, which can result in grief. And the reason I do that, I have, thousands and thousands of followers all over the place, but you never know. This may be their first time that they've seen one of my videos on my channel.
Sure. Yeah.
So we've already talked about what lipedema is and how it affects women, how it can end up in some cases in total immobility and people having to retire from work, like I did, due to
So
stress,
different.
due to, yeah, not being able to stay awake all day and active and energetic. So we know that there's an emotional impact to it, but how can a diagnosis of something like lipedema affect somebody's emotional well-being, and what are some common emotional challenges that people who have lipedema might face?
Okay. Well, before I dive into all that, let me just say that I have worked for years as a hospice chaplain and a VA chaplain when I was a resident at the VA hospital in Muskogee, Oklahoma. I worked several units in the rehab department where I had veterans who had had amputations, who had all sorts of debilitating and disfiguring kinds of experiences in the military. And I think that in some ways these experiences relate. I don't want to in any way say that they don't have very unique aspects about them as well. Um, so, you know, I believe everybody has a story, and everybody wants their story to be heard and understood. And so whenever anybody experiences a change in health, um, their story changes to some degree, and how whether or not their challenge, whatever their challenge is, their diagnosis, it can take over your life and it can start to write your story for you rather than you being empowered to respond and you be in charge of writing the story of you.
Mhm.
So um, I've experienced some health challenges myself, cancer related and that kind of thing, and I'm grateful to be cancer free today. Um, but I've also had some other lifelong health concerns. So um, I think that uh, when we find out that we have some kind of uh, a diagnosis that makes us in something makes us different from people who don't have that diagnosis, right? And begins to change our body. And um, there's a grief that's associated with that. And and it kind of, if you will, kind of breaks your heart when you find out, oh, I've got this development in my life that I I can't make go away.
Mhm.
It's going to be it's going to be with me for the rest of my life. Um, that it You end up needing to have your broken heart mended in some ways, and we begin to ask questions, because we human beings, we are meaning makers. We want to find some meaning in every challenge we face in life. And it's when the good things happen, we don't go, oh gosh, wonder what that means. No, but it's when the difficult things, somebody dies, or we find out we've got a diagnosis, or we have a career change, or whatever. Those are all losses that we experience. Some are more tangible than others. I would call the loss of health. I would place it under the category of what I call intangible losses. Even though it's very tangible to you in your body, it's it's not like having somebody die, and you process that grief and they get buried and you move on with your life. You don't get over somebody dying, you get through it. And I think the same thing's true of intangible loss. So um I mean, Susan, you are a perfect example of somebody who says, I'm not going to let lipedema, am I pronouncing it right?
You are. Hmm.
All right. I'm not going to let it write my story for me. I'm going to pick up that pen myself. I'm going to pick up that pen. I'm going to take that pen away from lipedema, and
Hmm.
I'm going to write my story.
Hmm.
Right. Um, I hope I'm answering your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting, just to sort of go off script here for a second for my
Sure.
questions, is that
Uh-huh.
with lipedema, it's such a weird disease because women, they start, a lot of times they'll start getting it when they hit puberty and they go all these years. And there's actually research that shows, we've walked around for years and years and years with our legs like getting, in my mind, my mom and I both have it, right? And so we use this term like we're freaks. Like that's what we would say about it before we knew what was wrong with us, right?
Uh,
And you see the looks and the stares and stuff, and you start covering up and hiding your legs and this and that. And then you hit this age where all of a sudden something happened, just like me, where you're like, I heard the word. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, this is an actual thing. This is why I can't, I've had bariatric surgery twice. I can't get these
right.
legs down or whatever. And there's this moment of, it's like a different emotion of like almost release whenever you get the
Uh,
diagnosis and you're like, oh, well, there it is. And then you start the grief process all over again because you realize, like, oh, this is something I can't fix. Like it just hits you at one day. And I think there's research that show that women go like 12 years of having symptoms before they get a diagnosis in the United States
wow.
right now. It's just so new in the research world. So
Right. Right.
whenever I talk about that, how do people typically navigate the grieving process when they get these changes in their bodies? And are
Yeah.
there specific stages of grief? Are they linear? Tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about that.
Yeah. Sure. Well, first, let me say that we define grief as something that is, it's a natural and normal response. So grief, it is normal to grieve. Whenever we have plans and hopes and dreams, or even kind of assumptions, I'm going to be healthy, right? And all of a sudden you find out you're not. When those things get dashed, or in any way we say, this could have been more, it could have been better, it could have been different than it was, but it's not. We experience disappointment, right? And disappointment is just another word for grief. Um, we grieve the things that don't work out the way we planned for them to, whether it's a marriage or your health, or loss of a loved one, or a career change, or whatever. So I'm kind of defining grief here, and so we call the thing that we do the grief recovery method. But there have been times I've thought, I think it might be better just for us to call this the life recovery method,
Right.
because I don't know anybody that's not grieving something. And grief is very unique to the griever. We experience our grief 100%. It's my grief. Nobody can experience it for me. It's mine 100%. Now, and it's not very helpful or healthy, I would say, to compare griefs, one type of grief to another. Just allow it to be what it is for that individual, whatever category of grief or loss or disappointment it falls under. It is uh, it's real, right? And so, um, in response to your question about grief, is it, or the process, is it linear? Elizabeth Kubler-Ross created this what we call the stages of grief, um, and the stages she wrote the stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, specifically for the patient who's been told you're dying, you are terminal. Okay. Now, in some ways, all of us humans, the moment we're born, we start
We're
dying.
terminal. Yeah.
Right. We're terminal. It's
Hmm.
coming for all of us, right? Right. But to take those stages and understand them in a kind of a linear fashion, or even not in a linear fashion, but just to assume that everybody who's grieving is going to experience those. She wrote those specifically for the terminal patient, right? So to take them and say, for the family who's left behind after a person dies, that they're all going to experience denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance in that order, or expect them to have all of those as stages of grief, is a misnomer. It is These are not steps in a process. Okay. So I would argue that if you have a loved one who you're in a good relationship with, like your grandma, and you visited her and you've told her how much you love her, and she's up in age, and she passes away, and everything was good. You told her how much you loved her. You kissed her last time you saw her. Why would you be angry? Right? Why would you not believe? Why would you be in denial? So all those, you can't assume that all of Kubler-Ross's stages of grief are going to be experienced by the griever, is not the way. And I belabor that. So
Hmm.
I'll move on. I think that having experienced loss of health myself, when um, back in 1985, I was diagnosed with sleep apnea, and I had surgery for that. And they took out my tonsils and my adenoids and my uvula, and they worked on the inside of my nose all at once. It literally felt like they cut off my head and sewed it back on. It was a mega sore throat, and I was on morphine for 4 days and all that. Um, but my life didn't get better after the surgery. And then later on in 91, I was right about the time we met, I was put on a CPAP machine, and then later a BiPAP machine. And I have literally 8 to 10 hours a day for the rest of my life. I've had literally more than a third of my life. I've had this thing strapped to my face when I sleep at night, and so that I can live a quality life and have good sleep and have REM sleep and all those things that are important, right?
Hmm.
Um, Coming to some level of acceptance about that, and knowing that when I travel or whatever, I can't go anywhere. I keep a machine in my car all the time in case I get stranded somewhere, because if I don't, I'm not going to sleep. So, okay, so I'm not comparing that to lymphedema, but I am comparing the fact that it was a loss of health that I won't ever get back, and I have to learn to live with. And
Hmm.
so, do I have the energy within me to be able to say to that thing, no, you give me that pen, I'm writing my story. You don't get to write my story. So, yes, I think that some of the signs of grief, as opposed to stages of grief, I would call shock and disbelief when you find out. I would definitely say sadness is a part of that. It comes, it's real. Um, Maybe even some sense of guilt, of of there's things I've said or done in response to um, this that I'd rather have back. I'd rather not say those things. I'd rather be in a more healthy frame of mind than I have been in the past. Anger, fear. What does the future hold for me? Am I going to end up in a wheelchair? Um, and of course, living with the physical pain. When I was at the VA hospital, I spent a lot of time actually researching what is it like to live with chronic pain.
Mm,
And so when I went into a patient's office, not their office, their room at their bedside, and I knew they were a patient who lived with chronic pain for whatever reason. I learned to ask them, tell me, what's it like? What's it like to live with pain all the time? Is there some way to make friends with this thing? Is there some way to develop kind of a relationship with this thing that lives with you all the time? Whether it's emotional pain. I mean, I spent some time in the mental health department at the hospital as well, and I reached the point where every morning I got up and I said, "Thank you, Lord, I have a healthy brain." Because if
mhm,
you don't have a healthy brain, nothing else works well, right? If your brain's not sending the right signals to your body,
mhm,
if the dopamine and the serotonin are not doing the things they're supposed to do, I could end up being another person, or my body may not work the way it used to work.
mhm.
And so anyway, yeah, I hope I answered your question. I feel
Yeah,
like I kind
absolutely.
of rambled a
And
little bit.
I think I'll bounce in with my own experience too here. So,
Please, yeah.
I've had this diagnosis now for 3 years. I've had the disease for 20. And even since the diagnosis, I remember early in my blogging and my social media stuff, I wrote a blog post that says, I don't want lipedema to take over my life, having no clue that I would end up becoming a full-time advocate and writing all these books and a shoe company and blah, blah, blah. Right.
Right,
But what's so
right.
weird is I've read literally every paper about lipedema there is in the world. I've read them all, right? I
Oh,
work with the best doctors in the world. Every Monday I meet with them and stuff. And there
right.
are still times whenever I wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh, I don't want to have this. I don't want to do this, you
Mm,
know, and you get just out of nowhere, you're mad, or just out of
right.
nowhere, you're like a little sad about it, and it's like, so talking about that, how the stages of grief and the symptoms of grief, they're not linear, and sometimes they hit you out of nowhere 3 years later, and it's a weird thing that you're never really done with it, which
Yeah,
is
right.
so let's move on to how you can help people with grief. And one of the things I said in the intro, Dan, is that um because the research on lipedema is so new,
Mhm,
the women who were affected by it, and there are millions and millions and millions of us, right, who
mhm,
right now we're so focused on the physiological things that are happening to our bodies. We're
mhm.
going to the doctor, we're wearing compression, we're doing all this stuff, but we haven't really taken the time to deal with the mental health and the psychosocial, areas of it. So
Right,
I
right.
honestly believe that every human being that's over the age of 18 needs to go to counseling anyway, because
It's,
everybody's
I,
got
I
baggage.
agree. I mean, I think if you do the work I do, you need a therapist, and I have a therapist, and I met with him
Absolutely.
yesterday,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Because I mean, there's a lot. Everybody's got a lot. But so if someone walked into your office or met with you,
Mm.
what kind of counseling approaches would you use? And what have you seen with the grief recovery method on helping people who are dealing with what we're calling body grief, or grief of, what could
Right.
have been and wasn't, right? So tell us a
Sure.
little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. I think I would begin first of all, obviously, by building some rapport with them and getting to know them, and not diving right in, but asking them questions like, what do you want from this? What is it? Because it's your energy that's going to drive this. It's not going to be mine. You know, I it's not going to be because you're paying for counseling. And so I've got some skin in the game. So I guess I ought to do something with this thing. It's because you want to be more healthy in your relationship with this disease that you have, and to be able um, to some degree live at some level of acceptance. There is a there's a quote out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, of all things, that says, acceptance is the answer to all of my problems today. If I can have some level of accepting this thing that is in my life, then I can find some empowerment to work on it. So it's important to know how to stop the negative thoughts, to start positive self-talk, learn some affirmations about how I am loved, I am valued. Um, you know, I've in addition to being a counselor, I've been in ministry for a long time, and one of the things that Scripture says is that we should love our neighbors as we love ourselves. So, how good am I at loving myself? How good am I being kind to myself and seeing myself as? And there's a theological concept we call imago Dei. That's Latin words for we are made in the image of God. When I look in the mirror, can I say to myself, I can see the image of God in front of me. So if I'm not healthy in my being, how many people grow up, go into careers, into life as human doers rather than human beings?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of us, we approach it as I'm going to do so I can have, and later on I'll work on being. And most of the time it's later on in life, after I get to retirement, that I'm going to try to focus on being the person I've always wanted to be. But I've spent my whole life doing so that I can have, so that I can later be. I want to suggest that we should begin with being, learning how to be a human being, and then letting that drive the things we do, and in relationship to your illness as well. Focus on being, and these things, loving myself, seeing the image of God when I look in the mirror, and so being, and then asking, what am I supposed to do so that I can have? But so many of us, it's all about doing so that I can have, and then later on I'll figure that being thing out, right? So these are the kinds of conversations I have with people when I first enter into a conversation with them about grief, because that it has to be driven by them. It has to be their energy that's driving their recovery.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine if you have somebody that's gone through years and years and years of hiding and wondering what's wrong with them. I mean, they're walking in with a lot of baggage. I can see myself if I went into therapy or counseling and you say, what do you want? And I'm like, I don't know, but I'm messed up, man. It might take a few sessions to sort of peel back that onion and figure out like what actually is going on here. Let's segregate some of these things so that we can start tackling,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And in some cases, I'll have them do some exercises like, journaling or writing down some thoughts about, if I could have whatever I want, what would my life look like? And what would I look like internally? So there are things that control us that I would call external locus of influence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have our internal locus of influence. And for many people in our society, external locus of influence are far greater in their lives than their internal focus. And we need to find a way to kind of reverse that so that I'm more controlled by an internal locus than an external locus. And that's part of the process I help people with, that you are not a victim of this thing.
Yeah.
You have power to have some control over, well, we all have the ability to control our response, or whether we react to things and whether we respond to them. I've been doing a lot of reading lately of the psychologist that he was from Austria. His name is Viktor Frankl, and he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And oh, that's my puppy. So Viktor Frankl spent 3 years in Auschwitz as a Jewish prisoner of war during World War II, and he watched his mother and his sisters end up dying in front of him. And he was kept alive because he was a doctor and had some value, and they used that. But he says this. He says that between the stimulus and response, there is a space that we all can decide how we're going to use that space. And that space is where we grow, and it's where we learn. And we get the, for me, I'm trying to not allow reaction to be a part, even an option for me. I don't want to react to things. I mean, we need reaction abilities and skills when we're in life-threatening situations, right? All of a sudden that your car, the tires lose traction and your car starts spinning around. You need to react to that. You don't want to take time to respond in a situation like that.
Right.
But in most of life, the things that happen, it's less healthy to react, and it's more healthy to take a moment and think about it and give a thoughtful response to what's going on. So hang on just a minute.
Isn't it great to have pets though? Because one of my next questions is going to be about support systems. And I have, oh, hi. I have pets at home too. He is so cute. Yeah. And it's so funny that the older you get, and especially for people who may be moving into isolation, to have a pet or something like that, that's comforting. It's actually a fantastic strategy that I think a lot of people, especially if people are living alone and you have that need for being touched 14 times a day and all that stuff, having a pet is super helpful. And I noticed a lot of ladies in the lipedema community also have pets that they're super close to. I'm like halfway to being a totally blacked out crazy cat lady, right? So okay. Yeah, he's fine.
He's Teddy is my little therapy dog. He's only 6 months old, so he's still a little unruly. So I'm gonna put him around here and see if he'll be quiet for me.
Right. And just, I mean, you know what? Everybody's working from home these days. As long as nobody's running around in whatever state, we're good.
As we say, as some folks in Oklahoma say, naked.
Yeah, naked. That's exactly right.
Running around naked.
So I think we have about 9 minutes left in our session today, right? Okay. So what I want to do, I want to ask you one more question about body image and self-esteem. And I'm going to talk a tiny little bit before I ask you this question. So obviously, ladies, first of all, there is a show that I watched. It was a women's conference where they had an activity that was called Stand Up for Another Woman. Right. And what they did, I don't know if you've heard about this or not, but they had a questionnaire that was stuff like, really kind of deep questions like, I've been sexually abused, or I mean, all kinds of stuff like that, right? But one of the questions was, I hate my body, right? This conference was all women. It's like, there's like 5 people in the room. And what they had you do is fold up your paper with all your answers. And I'll keep telling the story while Dan's getting his dog doing whatever with the dog, right? So what they would do is they would have the ladies fold up the paper, and they would put it in a basket. They mixed them all up, and then they passed this basket all around. So there's no way you could know whose paper you got, right? And then what happened was the facilitator stood up and she said, all right, so I'm going to go through this list of questions now, and you're going to stand up for another woman, right? And so she would go through the questions like, I've been sexually abused, and so many women in the room stand up, I live in poverty. So many people would stand up. Just, she's going through the list, right? And it's pretty impressive. She gets to the question that says, I hate my body. And if there were 500 people in the room, 496 of them stood up. And whenever I saw this in the movie theater. Whenever I saw this, it literally made me cry, because for my whole life, I have thought that I'm the only one who, I can't even say it, doesn't love my body, right? And when I realized that the woman sitting 3 aisles down, who I look at her and I think she's got her act together, she's so beautiful, she's rich, she's wearing nice clothes, she's with a, attractive man or whatever, she stood up. Somebody stood up for her in this room because she hates her body, right? So it turns out, and I tell this story all the time when I'm doing public speaking, right?
Right.
Because people
Right.
don't realize it. It just gave me chills, in fact.
Right.
Um, Most women in the United States and in the world have body image issues. So what I'm going to ask you is not only pertinent to women with lipedema, it's just magnified with women with lipedema. But, what if you had um, one thing, any success story, any tips, any kind of counseling guidance that you could give us? What are some things that women can do to help rebuild that sense of self-esteem and positive body image? And I think that that'll be our last question for this session. And
Okay.
then we'll continue on with more questions in a follow-up session.
Okay. Well, let me just say that I've had body image issues my whole life. It has to do with my how my parents and bullying and that kind of thing that I experienced in school when I was a fat little kid, and I was the fat kid in class, right? And I have always, I mean, I will go to family things and go off by myself and eat because I think people are judging me and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So um, I think that communication with others and making yourself being willing to be vulnerable in how you talk with others. There's a risk reward from vulnerability. It takes courage to be vulnerable, and to be willing to share your story with others who are going through the same kind of, find community. um, we are hardwired. We are built for connection with other people. We are not created for isolation,
Mm-hmm.
um, but we are created for connection. You cannot be known being alone. You cannot. And so the only way to keep um, a mended heart is to give your mended heart away. And so that means that you need to be around other people that are suffering and struggling with what you're struggling with, and and not be alone. Have a companion.
Mm-hmm.
and and give it away. um, Getting past disappointment, and that's what grief um, is not done in a vacuum. If it crosses your lips in conversation with another person, you can be free from it. So whatever it is, whether it's addiction or it's a disappointment or it's a loneliness, um, you cannot be known by being alone. I think that would be my answer. So find others who are struggling and struggle together.
Yeah. Yeah. And in our case, because we're scattered all over the world, these support groups that have popped up on Facebook and social medias and stuff like that, what it's turned into is in-person meetings, in-person events. A lot of us ladies, we get on Zoom and stuff with each other, even outside of these formal events, and we've become friends, and it's been really powerful. And I'll just tell you, we've got a couple of minutes left here in this session. I'm going to tell you one story about my personal legs like mine experience.
Mhm.
So I've been sharing my body now for 3 years. I don't sexualize my body in any of the stuff that I share, but I do show pictures of myself in a bathing suit, you know,
Right. Right.
and
That's pretty
doing
vulnerable.
it is, oh yeah, it's very vulnerable. And I've had so many people tell me, oh my gosh, Susan, thank you so much, because I did not know there was anyone else that looked like me in the world. And
Mhm.
then I started doing these outfit things, right? Like, and honestly, I go look at what Oprah's wearing and I copy her outfit, right?
Yeah, that's
This
great.
is an Oprah jacket.
Yeah.
But I have women come up to me when I was in Germany the other day at the World Congress, and this lady who's like a CEO of a big,
Right.
big company, right? She came up to me and she said, I did not ever give myself permission to be pretty until I saw what you do on Legs Like Mine. And
No.
it literally broke my heart, because I hear that story all the time now too. Like, I didn't know I had the right to wear beautiful fabrics because of who I am and how I'm made until I saw you. And so women who maybe you may be at home right now watching this from your bed or whatever, there is one thing that you can do, and that's to share your story. Even if you're not comfortable putting yourself out there in a bathing suit or whatever, do what you can to share your story. Because just like,
You are beautiful.
yeah, and we all are, right? Thank you.
That's right.
Um,
That's right.
yeah, and that's what people need to know is that, yeah, I mean, everybody's got flaws. We know now that most women don't love their bodies. That's a crazy thought, right? But it gives you a sense of empowerment. So in our parting words, we're going to do a follow-up session where I have like 10 or 12 more questions for you, right? Because I think
Yeah.
that it's going to be really valuable for my ladies. Tell us how people can find you on the internet, on social media, and all that stuff. What do they want to do? Do they have to be in Oklahoma to meet with you?
No, no. We do the work we do in person and online, just like this. And I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm meeting with a person in Moline, Illinois. I'm meeting with another one in Iowa. So even though we originally called this the Grief Recovery Center of Oklahoma, I'm finding out that that was kind of short-sighted because we already have a larger footprint than Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
So um, uh, www.griefrecoverycenterok.com.
Okay.
Uh, and I'm calling this Heart Mend, the Grief Recovery Center. So Heart Mend is our focus, and I'm getting ready to launch a YouTube channel that I'm going to call Meaning Makers,
Meeting makers.
and the whole pursuit of that whole Viktor Frankl thing that we human beings we endeavor to make meaning out of what we go through in life, and
Absolutely.
so we want to help people to mend their hearts, and we want to help them find meaning, and even in the most difficult things that happen, what is the meaning that can be found in this?
Right. Right. And with that, so you can find Dan on griefrecoverycenterok.com, and we'll be following up with a part 2 of this series in a couple of weeks. So, hey, friends, I hope you enjoyed today's interview. We will go through the holiday season here, and then here in about 3 or 4 weeks, we'll do part 2 at least of the interview with the folks from the Grief Recovery Center. If you have any questions that you'd like me to ask in the follow-up interview, you can drop me a line at legslikemine@gmail.com. And of course, you can comment here. Be sure and like and subscribe so that you don't miss it whenever we drop that second interview. All right, have a great day. Talk to you later. Bye.